So much for coming on. How would you assess what you're seeing now, tonight?
Well, you're seeing the lapses in security, the absence of realistic planning, bad leadership from the top, a failure to outline specifically what the goal was, which I think very clearly was to get all of the American citizens and allied citizens out before we withdrew any military power. All of this looks a lot like Benghazi on steroids.
Wait, I guess that's, and not to keep repeating it, but I'm going to continue to until I get a real answer. I don't understand why you would withdraw military force before every American who wants to leave has left. Isn't that your duty? Isn't it like the captain abandoning a ship and leaving the passengers to go to the bottom? Like, what is this?
Well, there's no question, Tucker, but I think General McKenzie answered your question. How is this possible? It strikes me that he concocted, and the planners that worked for him, a rosy scenario. Normally, when you operate in this kind of environment, you look at the worst case analysis. You plan for the worst thing the enemy can do to you, and then you backward plan from that.
Right.
Why was our perimeter so close to the Taliban? Why wasn't the Taliban told to stay at least 2,000 or 3,000 meters away from the airfield? We had no standoff. Where was the AC-130 in the air? Why didn't we have some mobile armored firepower on the ground in the form of Bradleys or tanks? You can fly them in and fly them out when you're finished. I don't understand what was going on. It strikes me that no one seemed to think this was really a dangerous environment. The only thing I can conclude is that this half-assed operation was McKenzie's fault primarily, but he's also got the Secretary of Defense. I assume that he briefed him, in which case the Secretary of Defense should be removed. And I know Milley is very unpopular with lots of people, but he's just an advisor. Apparently, he didn't give very good advice. You should clean house. This is reminiscent of what happened to JFK at the Bay of Pigs. He did not immediately clean house, but eventually he had to. I think we're in the same position right now.
Do you think, I mean, this is so humiliating for the United States. I know you had advocated for withdrawal from Afghanistan, so it's not like you're calling for permanent war there. You're on the opposite side. But the way we got out is so damaging to this country on every level that it almost seems like it was on purpose. I'm not a conspiracy person, but how could you do something like this? How could you imagine any other outcome but this?
I think people will say, well, there were people actively trying to present us with a failure. I'm not sure that's the case. I think we look a lot like the British Expeditionary Force at Dunkirk. By the time they reached the Channel, the only thing that saved them at the time was Hitler's decision to halt. Had the Germans continued, they'd have had 250,000 British prisoners. They were saved by a miracle. We can't depend on miracles in Afghanistan. We've got to save ourselves. And we haven't done a very good job of it. So we look feckless. We look incompetent. And I think our French and British allies privately are shaking their heads in disbelief because they've actually handled this much better than we have.
How distressing to hear that. How do you think this will play out from here?
Well, we'll get out, and the Taliban is probably going to do business with the countries around it. How that will turn out, I don't know. But I know that the Indians, the Russians, and the Iranians are all very sensitive to the real threat in the region, which emanates from Pakistan. That's the wellspring of Sunni Islamist terrorism, and the Taliban is funded by them. That's been the problem from day one, and we've never come to terms with that. And here we are 20 years later, $2 trillion in the hole, tens of thousands of wounded and killed, and what do we got for it? Nothing.
Do you think we'll get all the Americans out?
I hope so. I'm sure there are people on the ground there. I know them in the Army and the Marines. People that I knew when I was in active duty would say, we're not leaving until we're certain that every American is out. Now, will they be allowed to do that? Or are they going to be told by the Secretary of Defense and General McKenzie, I'm sorry, you have to leave, it's over? That I don't know. But if you leave it to the soldiers and Marines on the ground over there, hell yes.
Yeah, I believe that. Last question. I know that the Biden administration, unfortunately, has not called you for advice. They ought to. But if you were giving advice to the administration right now, what would you tell them to do?
Well, first of all, they need to stick with the withdrawal. But they need to make it a precondition that we will not leave until we have successfully extricated every American citizen. We need to make it clear to the Taliban. If there's any interference, then we will take whatever action is required against them. I don't think that the Taliban is stupid. I think at this point they recognize they've won what they want, and they are liable to go along with it. But at the same time, you can't appear feckless. You can't appear weak. Donald Trump never did that. He was always a voice of strength and influence and power. We need that desperately right now, and that's absent at the top.
Yeah, get our people out. Amen. Colonel Macgregor, thank you so much for that.
Yes, sir.
So in his remarks today, which one